Who was Martin Luther King? By Chris Bethea. When Martin Luther performed his I Have a Dream speech in Washington, the following quote stood out to me, being a citizen of this great state of Alabama. I have a dream that one day in Alabama, with this vicious racist and its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama will little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and little white girls as sisters and brothers. The specific purpose of my speech is to inform my audience about the life of one of America's greatest public speakers in the 20th century, Martin Luther King Jr. Mr. King's life should be an interest to all Americans today because it is through his persuasive and intelligent speeches that the multicultural America that we see today is indeed the way it is today. I have been a fan of Mr. King's most of my adult life. I studied his life and listened to many of his sermons and speeches over the years. I've also had the privilege to talk to people who were present at some of his most famous speeches. Today I will give you a brief biography of his life, analyze his I Have a Dream speech, how it affected so many people, and talk about the circumstances surrounding his untimely death. But first, let's talk about the early life of Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was born Michael King, Jr. on January 15, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. He was the son of Reverend Martin Luther King, Sr. and Alberta Williams King. After his father traveled to Europe in 1934, he changed his name and his son's name from Michael King to Martin Luther King. Growing up in Atlanta, young Martin attended Booker T. Washington High School, where he skipped 9th grade and 12th grade and entered Morehouse College at the tender age of 15 years old without formally graduating from high school. King ended his learning career with a doctorate of philosophy from the Boston University on June 5, 1955. He went on to marry Coretta Scott on June 18, 1953, and together they had 4 children. Martin Luther King became pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, at the tender age of 25 years old in 1954. Now that I've provided you a brief synopsis of Martin Luther King's early life, let's talk about the impact of one of his most famous speeches, his beloved I Have a Dream speech. Mr. King's I Have a Dream speech affected both white and black people across this fruited plain. Even the top guy in the land at the time, President Kennedy, remarked about his great oracle power. He made the statement, although in private, that guy is really good. And that's quite a compliment coming from Kennedy, who was not such a bad speaker himself. Although many people knew of Martin Luther King, it was not until he spoke in Washington, D.C. that the majority of the people really got a chance to really know him and his cause. Some people who considered all black people kind of ignorant got an opportunity to see an intelligent black man speak with eloquence and intelligence. This changed the minds of many Americans on the issue of the black struggle. Now that I provided an overview of his most famous speech and how it affected many lives, let's talk about the circumstances surrounding his untimely death. On April 4th, 1968, a sniper's bullet entered Mr. King's right cheek, traveling through his neck and severing his spinal cord, finally stopping in his shoulder blade, as he stood on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. Although he was quickly rushed to the hospital, he was pronounced dead an hour later at 7:05 p.m. Although James Earl Ray was arrested, many people believe he was innocent. Even members of King's own family shared in this belief. And although the FBI investigated the crime, many believes that they, the FBI, were partially, if not fully, responsible for the crime. I've done a lot of research into this crime, and I do not believe that Mr. Ray, I actually do believe that Mr. Ray was responsible for the crime. But the question that arises is, why was the crime done? Was he put up to it by some other entity or a government influence? These are some of the mysteries that still surround the death of one of America's greatest oracle speakers. Now, the purpose of my speech today was to inform you about Martin Luther King. And today I provide a brief synopsis of Mr. King's life. I've talked to you about the impact of one of his greatest speeches, and I've talked to you about his death and the circumstances surrounding it. One final thought. Looking around you here in Alabama, can you see Mr. King's dream being realized? Or do we still have far to go before it comes to fruition? Thank you.